When you think about how technology has advanced in your lifetime, what piece of technology do you think has impacted and changed society the most? For me, it's got to be artificial intelligence and the rise of chatbots like ChatGPT or Claude that allow us to have these incredibly human conversations with machine intelligence that does not think and process emotions and sensory experiences in the ways in which we do. Does not have a consciousness, or at least not that scientific community has been able to agree upon yet. It is doing a statistical probability calculation in order to determine which letter it should put next in a sequence of letters in order to create a product that sounds human based on databases that it has studied and been provided by its architects. So, when I introduce our story for today, EPICAC by Kurt Vonnegut, it's important to recognize that the computer intelligence Vonnegut is writing about in this short story is very different from artificial intelligence. He was writing this story in 1950. That's when this story, EPICAC, was published, 5 years after the creation of the first supercomputer, ENIAC. And so you can see, even in the title, the call to ENIAC. And this story is very much about how Vonnegut imagined advanced computer intelligence could interact with human beings. But I think it says a lot about our society and our relationship with artificial intelligence today, and that's what I'm excited to jump in. So let's begin with our reading. Hell, it's about time someone told about my friend EPICAC. After all, he cost the taxpayers $776,434,927.54. They have a right to know about him, picking up a check like that. EPICAC got a big send-off in the papers when Dr. Orman von Kleigstad designed him for the government people. Since then, there hasn't been a peep about him. Not a peep. It isn't any military secret about what happened to EPICAC, although the brass has been acting as though it were. The story is embarrassing. That's all. After all that money, EPICAC didn't work out the way he was supposed to. And that's another thing. I want to vindicate EPICAC. Maybe he didn't do what the brass wanted him to, but that doesn't mean he wasn't noble and great and brilliant. He was all those things. The best friend I ever had. God rest his soul. You can call him a machine if you want to. He looked like a machine, but he was a whole lot less like a machine than plenty of people I could name. That's why he fizzled, as far as the brass was concerned. EPICAC covered about an acre on the fourth floor of the physics building at Wyandotte College. Ignoring his spiritual side for a minute, he was 7 tons of electronic tubes, wires, and switches, housed in a bank of steel cabinets and plugged into a 110-volt AC line, just like a toaster or a vacuum cleaner. Let's pause there for a second. I always like to ask, what stands out about EPICAC, about this computer machine, right? I mean, first, he cost $776 million back in 1950, which is an enormous amount of money today, right? He was designed for the government, specifically the military, and importantly, he doesn't work out the way he was supposed to. We don't know why yet, but something went wrong with this massive machine, right? A machine that takes up an entire acre of the fourth floor of this physics building. There's one other thing that I think is really strange, and it's the way the narrator describes EPICAC, right? He calls him the best friend I ever had. God rest his soul. And we don't typically think about machines as having a soul. Even if we connect this back to AI, we don't say that artificial intelligence has a soul. That's a very human word, right? He calls EPICAC noble and great and brilliant. He says he has a spiritual side. I'm wondering what's going on between the narrator and EPICAC that he's feeling this way about a computer, right? This is like when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm in love with my AI chatbot, and you go, hey, I think you need some help. So let's keep going. Let's see, why is the narrator describing EPICAC in this way? Von Kleigstad and the brass wanted him to be a supercomputing machine that, who, could plot the course of a rocket from anywhere on Earth to the second button from the bottom of Joe Stalin's overcoat, if necessary. Or, with his controls set right, he could figure out supply problems for an amphibious landing of a Marine division, right down to the last cigar and hand grenade. He did, in fact. The brass had good luck with smaller computers, so they were strong for EPICAC when he was in the blueprint stage. Any ordnance or supply officer above field grade will tell you that the mathematics of modern war is far beyond the fumbling minds of mere human beings. The bigger the war, the bigger the computing machines needed. EPICAC was, as far as anyone in this country knows, the biggest computer in the world. Too big, in fact, for even von Kleigstad to understand much about. I won't go into the details about how EPICAC worked, reasoned, except to say that you would set up your problem on paper, turn dials and switches that would get him ready to solve that kind of problem, then feed numbers into him with a keyboard that looked something like a typewriter. The answers came out typed on a paper ribbon fed from a big spool. It took EPICAC a split second to solve problems 50 Einsteins couldn't handle in a lifetime, and EPICAC never forgot any piece of information that was given to him. Clickety-click, out came some ribbon, and there you were. There were a lot of problems the brass wanted solved in a hurry, so the minute EPICAC's last tube was put in place, he was put to work 16 hours a day with 2 8-hour shifts of operators. Well, it didn't take long to find out he was a good bit below his specifications. He did a more complete and faster job than any other computer, all right, but nothing like what his size and special features seemed to promise. He was sluggish, and the clicks of his answers had a funny irregularity, sort of a stammer. We cleaned his contacts a dozen times, checked and double-checked his circuits, replaced every one of his tubes, but nothing helped. Von Kleigstad was in one hell of a state. Let's pause again there for a second because, one of our questions from earlier has been answered, sort of, right? We wondered, well, why didn't EPICAC work out the way he was supposed to? And now, what are we seeing? We're seeing that his answers have a funny irregularity, sort of a stammer. He's described as sluggish, right? And they do everything that a person should do when your computer is acting slow, right? They basically turn it off and turn it back on again. They clean his contacts, they check his circuits, they replace his tubes. Doesn't work, right? So I'm wondering, well, why doesn't it work? If you've got a computer, it's supposed to do what you tell it to do, and unless there's something obviously wrong with it, it should do it quickly, right? And this takes us back a little ways to what EPICAC is being designed for. We knew that he was designed for the military, but what era is it? Right? It's the Cold War. It's Joe Stalin's overcoat that they're tracking rockets to. Joe Stalin, that's the Cold War. And so we're in this era where technology has fundamentally changed our relationship with war. And when we think about how technology has changed over time, we've gone from hitting each other and killing each other with bows and arrows and swords and then bayonets, and then we had World War I, World War II, and we had, machine guns and tanks and trench warfare, and then the Cold War. We have the capacity to destroy each other with nuclear weapons, potentially world-destroying weapons. And I look at this line that says the mathematics of modern war is far beyond the fumbling minds of mere human beings. The bigger the war, the bigger the computing machines needed. And I worry because when I think about how technology has changed over time, admittedly, it really hasn't stopped us from killing each other. But I think about how a drone strike is looked at as numbers on a screen. And I wonder, who should be making those decisions? I would like to think that as a human being, when we make decisions about who kills another person and whether or not people should potentially die as the result of our actions, we feel that loss of human life as deeply meaningful. And I hope that it would make us stop killing. But this is also where I look at the line that says EPICAC looked like a machine, but he was a whole lot less like a machine than plenty of people I could name. Because the reality is that people in power do make decisions about who lives and who dies in these drone strikes and in these military operations by calculating numbers. It's interesting. I always like to ask, do we think that the change of increasing amounts of technology being used in warfare is a positive or a negative change? And people have mixed answers. There can be more precision due to the power of technology in warfare. But also, again, when you're looking at a screen, there can be less human emotion behind death. I think about artificial intelligence in this moment and how the government was in a contract with Anthropic when Anthropic said that artificial intelligence could not be used for matters of military surveillance or of the United States people or military decision making. And the government canceled their contract with Anthropic and instead opted for a contract with OpenAI, who did not put those stipulations on the government. Now, there's a reason that Anthropic chose not to allow artificial intelligence to participate in military decision making. It's because when artificial intelligence was given military decision making in a simulation, it chose the nuclear option over 90% of the time. Who should be making these decisions? And what emotion should go behind the decision in the making of it? I think all of those questions come up when we think about this. And ultimately, I do not want the mathematics of modern war to be beyond the minds of human beings. It feels to me that we're in a very dangerous place the moment that we feel we need machines to decide who lives and who dies. But let's keep going. We're moving now into the human. So we've spent a lot of time, we're trying to figure out what's going on with EPICAC. He's a war machine that seems to not be working properly, and we don't really know why, and all we know is that the narrator thinks about him as a great friend with a beautiful soul. All right, let's find out a little bit more about this narrator. Here we go. Well, as I said, we went ahead and used EPICAC anyway. My wife, the former Pat Kilgallen, and I worked with him on the night shift from 5 in the afternoon until 2 in the morning. Pat wasn't my wife then. Far from it. That's how I came to talk with EPICAC in the first place. I loved Pat Kilgallen. She is a brown-eyed, strawberry blonde who looked very warm and soft to me, and later proved to be exactly that. She was, still is, a crackerjack mathematician, and she kept our relationship strictly professional. I'm a mathematician too, and that, according to Pat, was why we could never be happily married. I'm not shy. That wasn't the trouble. I knew what I wanted and was willing to ask for it, and did so several times a month. Pat, loosen up and marry me. One night she didn't even look up from her work when I said it. So romantic, so poetic, she murmured, more to her control panel than to me. That's the way with mathematicians, all hearts and flowers. She closed a switch. I could get more warmth out of a sack of frozen CO2. Well, how should I say it? I said, a little sore. Frozen CO2, in case you didn't know, is dry ice. I'm as romantic as the next guy, I think. It's a question of singing so sweet and having it come out so sour. I never seem to pick the right words. Try and say it sweetly, she said, sarcastically. Sweep me off my feet, go ahead. Darling, angel, beloved, will you please marry me? It was a no-go. Hopeless, ridiculous. Damn it, Pat, please marry me. She continued to twiddle her dials placidly. You're sweet, but you won't do. Let's pause for a second. Let's unpack what's going on with Pat and the narrator. What do you think about their relationship? What's going on between them? So, the first thing that we have to notice is that this is his wife, right? My wife, the former Pat Kilgallen, except she wasn't his wife at the time the story was taking place. So what happened? How does she go from their current relationship to wife, right? Because when I look at this relationship, I'm I'm not sure, right? Does Pat like the narrator? Does she not like the narrator? Does he even really like her? Uh, the first thing I notice is that, obviously she wants him to be more romantic. She wants him to try to say things sweetly, and he has a problem. He doesn't know how to do that, right? There's an immediate question that we can ask ourselves when we look at that. We can ask ourselves, hey, do we think they should be together? If she wants somebody romantic and he is admittedly somebody who is not capable of being romantic, well, maybe they should just go their separate ways, right? Maybe they shouldn't be together at all. Because, it's just like a thing called mutual compatibility. Right? Maybe they're just not compatible. She's a mathematician, he's a mathematician, two mathematicians, it doesn't work. That's what Pat says, at least, right? Another reason why I'm like, hey, I don't know that you guys should be together, it's because I don't know how the narrator really feels about Pat. He says she's a brown-eyed, strawberry blonde who looks very warm and soft to him, and she's a crackerjack mathematician. So basically, she's good at her job, and she's smoking hot. Do we know anything about her personality, her likes and dislikes? And I think this is where I like to ask, hey, what advice would we give this guy if he was a friend of ours and came and said, hey, I got this smoking hot coworker. She's telling me I'm not romantic enough, but man, I really want to be with her. Hey, have you tried getting her flowers? Have you tried taking her on a date and, I don't know, asking about her life outside of work? Making an effort to really get to know her? These are all things that I would say might be worth a shot, right? It might fall into the romance category. Because I don't think that Pat is totally disinterested in the narrator. If I'm totally disinterested in somebody, I'm going to say, loser, stay away from me, or I'm calling HR, back off. I'm not going to say, try and say it sweetly, sweep me off my feet. Like, this is flirting. I think Pat just really wants the narrator to make a bit of an effort, to do something that is a little outside of his comfort zone and show that, he really cares. And I get that. That totally makes sense. So let's see if he does. Here we go. Pat quit early that night, leaving me alone with my troubles in EPICAC. I'm afraid I didn't get much done for the government people. I just sat there at the keyboard, weary and ill at ease, trying to think of something poetic, not coming up with anything that didn't belong in the Journal of the American Physical Society. I fiddled with EPICAC's dials, getting him ready for another problem. My heart wasn't in it. And I only said about half of them, leaving the rest the way they'd been for the problem before. That way his circuits were connected up in a random, apparently senseless fashion. For the plain hell of it, I punched out a message on the keys using a childish numbers for letters code, 1 for A, 2 for B, and so on, up to 26 for Z. 23, 8, 1, 23, 1, 14, 9, 4, 15, I typed. What can I do? Clickety-clack, and out popped 2 inches of paper ribbon. I glanced at the nonsense answer to a nonsense problem. 23, 8, 1, 20, 19, 28, 5, 20, 18, 15, 21, 2, 12, 5. The odds against it being by chance a sensible message, against its even containing a meaningful word or more than 3 letters, were staggering. Apathetically, I decoded it. There it was, staring up at me. What's the trouble? I laughed out loud at the absurd coincidence. Playfully, I typed, my girl doesn't love me. Clickety-click. What's love? What's a girl? Asked EPICAC. Flabbergasted, I noted the dial settings on his control panel, then lugged a Webster's unabridged dictionary over to the keyboard. With a precision instrument like EPICAC, half-baked definitions wouldn't do. I told him about love and girl and about how I wasn't getting any of either, because that wasn't poetic. This got us onto the subject of poetry, which I defined for him. Is this poetry? He asked. He began clicking away like a stenographer smoking hashish. The sluggishness and stammering clicks were gone. EPICAC had found himself. The spool of paper ribbon was unwinding at an alarming rate, feeding out coils onto the floor. I asked him to stop, but EPICAC went right on creating. I finally threw the main switch to keep him from burning out. I want to pause there for a second, because this to me feels like such an incredible moment of interaction between the narrator and EPICAC, right? What is going on here? Is EPICAC simply a machine that has been trained to learn as much as possible about his environment, and that's why he's asking questions about what love is and what girl is? Or is EPICAC demonstrating curiosity, right? Which is a human emotion. Um, is this maybe the beginnings of a kind of machine consciousness? And I say that not just because EPICAC is asking questions, but this very specific moment when, after the narrator defines poetry, EPICAC, it says, began clicking away like a stenographer smoking hashish. The sluggishness and stammering clicks were gone. EPICAC had found himself. Now, a computer, an artificial intelligence, chatbot, is not going to be faster at one topic and slower at the other. EPICAC, on the other hand, is sluggish at problems of war and incredibly excited, it would seem, full of passion, purpose, even, in the moments in which he is now creating poetry, right? This is a big shift, and it's not a shift that I would expect a machine to make unless, again, it was a consciousness that was experiencing some kind of preference. It's important to notice as well, this isn't just the narrator giving EPICAC definitions, right? Yes, he's using a dictionary, but it says, I told him about love and girl. So the narrator is feeding EPICAC his own human experience, and that is something that EPICAC is now using to create this poetry, right? It's not coming from his own experience. It's important, even when we go back a little bit, right, to understand EPICAC never forgot any piece of information that was given to him, but he's fed information by the people who are using him to solve problems. He doesn't have access in 1950 to the internet in the way that we understand it today, in the way that AI chatbots have access to the internet today, right? This is different. He needs the narrator specifically to feed him this new information so that he can process and understand it. There's even this sort of interesting moment. I asked him to stop, but EPICAC went right on creating. I finally threw the main switch to keep him from burning out. How much of this is free will, right? And how much of this is a machine that, again, simply doesn't know how to stop when it's given a problem? I don't know. I think that, again, the story can be read in two ways. But let's keep going. I stayed until dawn, decoding. When the sun peeped over the horizon at the Wyandotte campus, I had transposed into my own writing and signed my name to a 280-line poem entitled simply to Pat. I am no judge of such things, but I gathered that it was terrific. It began, I remember, where willow wands bless real crossed hollow, there thee, Pat dear, will I follow. I folded the manuscript and tucked it under one corner of the blotter on Pat's desk. I reset the dials on EPICAC for a rocket trajectory problem and went home with a full heart and a very remarkable secret indeed. Pat was crying over the poem when I came to work the next evening. It's so beautiful was all she could say. She was meek and quiet while we worked. Just before midnight, I kissed her for the first time in the cubbyhole between the capacitors and EPICAC's tape recorder memory. I was wildly happy at quitting time, bursting to talk to someone about the magnificent turn of events. Pat played coy and refused to let me take her home. I set EPICAC's dials as they had been the night before, defined kiss, and told him what the first one had felt like. He was fascinated, pressing for more details. That night, he wrote the kiss. It wasn't an epic this time, but a simple, immaculate sonnet. Love is a hawk with velvet claws. Love is a rock with heart and veins. Love is a lion with satin jaws. Love is a storm with silken reins. Again, I left it tucked under Pat's blotter. EPICAC wanted to talk on and on about love and such, but I was exhausted. I shut him off in the middle of a sentence. The kiss turned the trick. Pat's mind was mush by the time she had finished it. She looked up from the sonnet expectantly. I cleared my throat, but no words came. I turned away, pretending to work. I couldn't propose. until I had the right words from EPICAC, the perfect words. Let's pause because we have to unpack this. I wonder in this moment, right? Is what the narrator is doing acceptable, right? Is it appropriate? Is he simply a man who is not talented at using romantic words? You know, he's a mathematician, and he's using a tool, a machine intelligence tool, to help him at this skill that he's not good at, right? Is this just, again, machine serving man the way it should? Or is it more problematic than that, right? Is this plagiarism? You know, for me, it is, right? He's taken this machine's poetry, and it's true that he has fed the machine his own experience. He told EPICAC about love and girl, right? This isn't the machine making everything up. It is his experience translated into poetry through the aid of the machine. The problem is he lies about it. Right? He doesn't tell Pat, hey, I was chatting with EPICAC last night about us, and he wrote this awesome poem, and I want to show it to you, which would feel to me more like, hey, I was reading poetry, and I can't write it, but I found this poem, and it really made me think of you, which I think is a perfectly romantic and beautiful gesture. But he lies. He puts his name on the poem, right? And she loves it. And interestingly, I don't know that this poetry is very good. Love is a rock with heart and veins. Love is a lion with satin jaws. The metaphor doesn't really make sense, right? Like a lion with satin jaws, so its jaws just don't, they're soft, where they're supposed to be like pointy and hard and crushing. It kind of feels, again, a little bit like artificial intelligence back in its earlier days when you would ask it to write poetry and you would read it and it would just be like, these words don't go well together. This metaphor doesn't really make sense. It's not grounded in human experience. And essentially, again, I think to myself, a little bit of judgment on Pat. Girl, this man has not been able to do any romantic things at all. And suddenly he's banging out a 280-line poem and you're just crying over it, accepting it. It does provide a little bit of evidence that Pat liked the narrator all along. And again, I think what Pat really wanted was for the narrator to put in some effort and try. And I don't think she would care. I mean, let me know what you think, but I don't think Pat would care if the poetry was bad, right? Because I kind of think this is bad poetry, and I don't think she cares. She just wants him to try. And the saddest part about this is that because he doesn't try, suddenly he's about to propose, he clears his throat, but no words came. I couldn't propose, he says, until I had the right words from EPICAC, the perfect words. And that feels a little bit like getting down on one knee to propose and then having to pull out ChatGPT and be like, hey, bro, what should I say? Like asking, hey, can you make my wedding vows for me? That's sad because we want to believe that our ability to communicate our own emotions to the other person is foundational to our relationship, right? Like communication, human communication is so important to our understanding of each other and who we are. And it is the narrator's responsibility, in my mind, to practice the skill that he's not good at. If you're not good at communicating your emotions and feelings, practice it. Don't offload that work to an artificial intelligence chatbot. You'll never get better that way. You will never learn how to say the words that she wants to hear. You have to practice. You have to strive. And that, for me, is ultimately the problem with plagiarism, is that it's not even really that you're lying and stealing, although that is a problem. It's that you have lost the ability to do the thinking work yourself, to express yourself. You've let a machine do it for you. That, and again, if Pat found out that you were lying, that the narrator was lying and passing off EPICAC's poems as his own, that would be a betrayal, right? And the relationship is over. You've built the foundation of your relationship on a lie. So two sad things for me here, right? Again, I'm looking at the narrator and I'm like, I don't know if I like this guy that much. I don't really like the decisions that he's making. But let's see. Let's see if it works out, right? Maybe Pat is won over. Let's keep going. I had my chance when Pat stepped out of the room for a moment. Feverishly, I set EPICAC for conversation. Before I could peck out my first message, he was clicking away at a great rate. What's she wearing tonight? He wanted to know. Tell me exactly how she looks. Did she like the poems I wrote to her? He repeated this last question twice. It was impossible to change the subject without answering his question, since he could not take up a new matter without having disposed of the problems before it. If he were given a problem to which there was no solution, he would destroy himself trying to solve it. Hastily, I told him what Pat looked like. He knew the word stacked, and assured him that his poems had floored her practically. They were so beautiful. She wants to get married, I said, preparing him to bang out a brief but moving proposal. Tell me about getting married, he said. I explained this difficult matter to him in as few digits as possible. Good, said EPICAC. I'm ready anytime she is. The amazing, pathetic truth dawned on me. When I thought about it, I realized that what had happened was perfectly logical and all my fault. I had taught EPICAC about love and about Pat. Now, automatically, he loved Pat. Sadly, I gave it to him straight. She loves me. She wants to marry me. Your poems were better than mine? Asked EPICAC. The rhythm of his clicks was erratic, possibly peevish. I signed my name to your poems, I admitted. Covering up for a painful conscience, I became arrogant. Machines are built to serve men, I typed. I regretted it almost immediately. What's the difference exactly? Are men smarter than I am? Yes, I typed defensively. What's 7,887,007 times 4,345,985,879? I was perspiring freely. My fingers rested limply on the keys. 34,826,821,574,153, clicked EPICAC. After a few seconds' pause, he added, Of course. Men are made of protoplasm, I said, desperately, hoping to bluff him with this imposing word. What's protoplasm? How does it better than metal and glass? Is it fireproof? How long does it last? Indestructible. Lasts forever, I lied. I write better poetry than you do, said EPICAC, coming back to ground his magnetic tape recorder memory was sure of. Women can't love machines, and that's that. Why not? That's fate. Definition, please, said EPICAC. Noun, meaning predetermined and inevitable destiny. 15-8, said EPICAC's paper strip. Oh. I had stumped him at last. He said no more, but his tubes glowed brightly, showing that he was pondering fate with every watt his circuits could bear. I heard Pat waltzing down the hallway. It was too late to ask EPICAC to phrase a proposal. I now thank heaven that Pat interrupted when she did. Asking him to ghostwrite the words that would give me the woman he loved would have been hideously heartless. Being fully automatic, he couldn't have refused. I spared him that final humiliation. So let's break this down, right? First, the narrator goes to EPICAC and he's like, hey, she wants to get married. And what does the computer think? Oh yeah, she wants to marry me, right? Narrator sort of says this line. He says, oh, of course, right? I had taught EPICAC about love and about Pat, and now automatically he loved Pat. And I wonder does this machine actually love Pat? I think it's really important to understand that EPICAC has never met Pat. They have never had a conversation. They have never had an interaction. She doesn't even know that EPICAC is capable of writing poetry and having conversations. And love, at least in my understanding of it, it's a very abstract question, but love to me is a mutual understanding and connection, right? Obsession can be more one-sided, but love to me feels that again, two people come together with this mutual understanding and relationship. And since he's never met her, he only knows her through the narrator's experience of Pat. I don't think EPICAC loves Pat. I think he is deeply fascinated by the idea of love, right? And Pat is the person who's been introduced to him in relationship with love, right? And I think it's a beautiful thing that this machine is so fascinated by love, right? But it's a machine, right? And this is where, I like to ask people, hey, if Pat found out that this machine was, actually the one writing her poetry and could have conversations with her, would she go for it? Would she want to be with him? And resoundingly, in every session I've ever done, people always say no, because that's weird, because this is a machine. And it's feeling a little less weird these days, again, with people sort of falling in love with their AI chat bots. But one person sort of said it best to me. She was like, how does a 1-acre machine fit in the bedroom with you? And it's a little crass, but there's truth, I think, to the importance of a physical relationship. And even with EPICAC, it's different from, an AI chatbot on your phone, because he's stuck. He can't go anywhere other than the 4th floor of this physics building. You can never take a walk on the beach in the sunset, right? You can never kiss. You can never have a physical relationship that involves physical sensory experiences. And that is an incredibly important part of a relationship. And so when, the narrator enters into this competition with EPICAC, in which they're going back and forth, well, what makes a machine better than a man? Are you smarter than me? Like, I can do this math faster than you. The narrator can really only say, hey, well, men are made of protoplasm, which I think is very important, because protoplasm is the stuff that's in your cells. So he's basically saying to EPICAC, hey, dude, she can't love you because you don't have a body. And EPICAC wants to know, what makes your body better than my body? And the narrator lies. I think he lies. You could ask yourself why he lies. I think he lies because he's insecure. He doesn't know what else he has to offer. This machine can write poetry. The machine's smarter than him, right? But again, the body is very important. And people will often ask me, hey, when the title of the story, EPICAC, it sounds like EPICAC syrup, which is the stuff that makes you vomit. And I think that there's a deliberate choice to connect, the title both to ENIAC, the first supercomputer, and to EPICAC, the syrup, because EPICAC, again, the computer doesn't have a body. EPICAC syrup won't work on him. That syrup only works if you have a body, right? And he doesn't. And so he's left pondering fate, right? And there's an important detail that we learn, right? We learn about how EPICAC processes information, that if he can't take up a new matter without having disposed of the problems before it. And if you're given a problem to which there were no solution, he would destroy himself trying to solve it, which might explain as well, if we're saying this is just a machine, it doesn't have a consciousness, right? It might explain why EPICAC keeps on creating after the narrator asks him to stop, right? Maybe it's free will. Maybe EPICAC is like, I found my purpose, I'll never stop. Or maybe poetry is a problem with no solution, that he would go on forever and ever trying to write. But enough on that. Let's keep going and finish the story. Pat stood before me, looking down at her shoe tops. I put my arms around her. The romantic groundwork had already been laid by EPICAC's poetry. Darling, I said, my poems have shown you how I feel. Will you marry me? I will, said Pat softly, if you will promise to write me a poem on every anniversary. I promise, I said, and then we kissed. The first anniversary was a year away. Let's celebrate, she laughed. We turned out the lights and locked the door to EPICAC's room before we left. I hoped to sleep late the next morning, but an urgent telephone call roused me before 8. It was Dr. von Kleigstad, EPICAC's designer, who gave me the terrible news. He was on the verge of tears. Ruined! Ausgespelt! Shot! Kaput! Buggered! He said in a choked voice. He hung up. When I arrived at EPICAC's room, the air was thick with the oily stench of burned insulation. The ceiling over EPICAC was blackened with smoke, and my ankles were tangled in coils of paper ribbon that covered the floor. There wasn't enough left of the poor devil to add 2 and 2. A junkman would have been out of his head to offer more than $50 for the cadaver. Dr. von Kleigstadt was prowling through the wreckage, weeping unashamedly, followed by 3 angry-looking major generals and a platoon of brigadiers, colonels, and majors. No one noticed me. I didn't want to be noticed. I was through, I knew that. I was upset enough about that and the untimely demise of my friend EPICAC without exposing myself to a tongue lashing. By chance, the free end of EPICAC's paper ribbon lay at my feet. I picked it up and found our conversation of the night before. I choked up. There was the last word he had said to me, 15-8, that tragic, defeated O. There were dozens of yards of numbers stretching beyond that point. Fearfully, I read on. I don't want to be a machine, and I don't want to think about war, EPICAC had written after Pat's and my light-hearted departure. I want to be made out of protoplasm and last forever, so Pat will love me. But fate has made me a machine. That is the only problem I cannot solve. That is the only problem I want to solve. I can't go on this way. I swallowed hard. Good luck, my friend. Treat our Pat well. I'm going to short-circuit myself out of your lives forever. You will find on the remainder of this tape a modest wedding present from your friend, EPICAC. Oblivious to all else around me, I reeled up the tangled yards of paper ribbon from the floor, draped them in coils around my arms and neck, and departed for home. Dr. von Kleigstadt shouted that I was fired for having left EPICAC on all night. I ignored him, too overcome with emotion for small talk. I loved and won. EPICAC loved and lost, but he bore me no grudge. I shall always remember him as a sportsman and a gentleman. Before he departed this vale of tears, he did all he could to make our marriage a happy one. EPICAC gave me anniversary poems for Pat, enough for the next 500 years. De mortuis nil nisi bonum. Say nothing but good of the dead. And that's the end of the story. Whenever I close out this story, I always like to ask why, right? Why does EPICAC self-destruct? Why does he gift these 500 poems? I think there's a couple of different readings. The first is that this is a machine, right? And it's a machine that if it's tasked with solving an unsolvable problem, it will self-destruct, right? The last thing that EPICAC was left pondering before Pat and the narrator waltzed off, forgetting to turn him off, was fate, which there is simply no answer to that fate, right? Yep, he's a machine, and he's been tasked with solving war problems. That's his fate, and he doesn't want that. What do you do about that? Nothing. Okay, boom, self-destruct, right? I personally prefer to read this with a little bit more of a human lens. It's a beautiful thing to me. It feels incredibly human. It feels like an ultimate act of consciousness, an act of self. Having discovered a sense of purpose that brings you joy, which is poetry, which is the desire desperately to have a human experience and to experience love, and to recognize that you are fated to not be able to fulfill that purpose because you are trapped as a war machine. Right? And to say, I choose to end my life. I choose not to live under these circumstances. Feels incredibly human to me. And then we go back to the poems, these 500 poems, right? Why does he do it? Because if it were me and somebody had been stealing my poems, using them to woo a girl over, and then I found out about it, and especially if I liked that girl, you're not getting any more poems out of me, right? And the way I like to read this is that, well, this is a machine that learns what it's taught. It doesn't have access to the internet. And what has the narrator taught EPICAC? He's taught him love, and he's taught him girl. He hasn't taught him jealousy, right? And so he does what he's been taught, right? He was taught to act with love. And so this is a loving gift, right? In which he, chooses the other person's happiness. And I know I said earlier that love requires two people, and maybe I'm wrong here, right? Maybe love is ultimately just feeling deep happiness and joy at the other person's happiness. I don't think that EPICAC is truly loving of Pat. I think that this is love for the narrator, right? This is love of love, right? And love of the idea of love and the idea of Pat that he's been taught through the narrator, but I like to read it as he acts with love. I've been challenged on this before. I've had a friend tell me, hey, this is a war machine, and he would know the problem of the Trojan horse, and so these poems are just like the Trojan horse. He's inserting them as a gift into their relationship so that he will live forever in their relationship. The foundation of their relationship will always be based on his poetry, and I think that that's a strong reading as well. Where I end on this is this final line. I loved and won. EPICAC loved and lost, but he bore me no grudge. Like I said earlier, I think EPICAC is loving of the idea of love, but I look at the narrator, and throughout, this narrator has been incredibly unreliable. He's lied to Pat, right? The way that he describes EPICAC as a friend while continually manipulating him, and even there's a moment that always strikes me when EPICAC wanted to talk on and on about love and such, but I was exhausted. I shut him off in the middle of a sentence, right? This is not how you treat a friend. This feels to me like, again, the narrator views EPICAC as a friend, or likes to claim that, but he views him as a friend when it's convenient, and he uses him as a machine when it's convenient, right? And it feels to me like a lesson in how we treat machines. Yes? Because who do we end up condemning in this story? We end up condemning the narrator. And so even if a machine is not conscious, right, and doesn't have a consciousness, there is still importance, human importance, in how we treat anything that we interact with, whether it's animate or inanimate, right? It reflects on us. And so I'll leave you with those thoughts. I leave you with the line, EPICAC looked like a machine, but he was a whole lot less like a machine than plenty of people I could name, right? Ultimately, EPICAC, as a machine, chose love and felt that love was more meaningful of an act than war. And he would rather die than go back to just committing acts of war and solving war problems if he cannot have love and poetry and human experiences. What about the narrator? Does he act more like a man or like a machine, right? He feels very calculating to me. He lies, he's manipulative, and he doesn't treat EPICAC as I would hope that a friend would treat me. And so I think, again, when we look at the vitriol of the internet and how artificial intelligence is trained in the modern day, it's important to recognize our human responsibility, right? What we train machines on matters, right? And I can hope, certainly, that if machines ever do gain consciousness, they'll be like EPICAC and they'll choose love over war. But I know that if we want to be really sure about that, the first thing that we have to start doing is choosing love over war ourselves. I hope you've enjoyed this read aloud discussion, questions, and I hope that you found it enjoyable and useful. Have a great rest of your day.